recorded. So let me start recording now. I'm Mark Burke. I'm from Howard University and part of the DC CFAR Developmental Core. And I'd like to welcome everybody. We're going to probably get more as more people joining us in a few minutes. But for the sake of time, it's 12:30. I want to begin today. And I want to welcome each one of you to our collaborative lunch series today, and especially Marcia Ellis. She is amazing. Simple word, amazing. When you read through her bio, she's done all from education to being on large nonprofit organizations. She describes herself as a social justice advocate and an activist, and that's really what she is. She is a strong voice, and I've gotten to know Marcia. I've been with the CFAR for a little over 5 years, and I've been able to get to know Marcia a little bit. And I don't know if she's really noticed this, but every time we have a large meeting, I always tend to get to sit next to her, and that's, I think, partially, even if it's subconscious, it's partially on purpose, because when everybody's speaking, we all get to hear each other's voices, but it's those side conversations that I just enjoy so much with Marcia, being able to pick her brain and bounce ideas off from her. And one thing I've learned about Marcia is that she is extraordinarily thoughtful with every single one of her words. I don't think she wastes words. She's like, oh, really? Yeah. She's very thoughtful, and she speaks with such a command. She is not loud, but just when she speaks, she commands your attention, and that makes her so powerful. And she is a strong and successful advocate for the community and research, and I really am happy to have her here today to learn more about our community partnership within the CFAR. And you know, she takes the community representation and the community involvement to a degree that makes it so successful within the CFAR and makes everybody's research more successful. And I really want to thank her for being here today and agreeing to be part of this collaborative lunch, and everybody for being part of this as well. So with that, I am going to share her PowerPoint with you. And I am, share screen. Okay, great. Share, all right. So does everybody see the PowerPoint right now? So Marcia is going to let me know when I have to go on to the next one. Is that good? Marcia, do you see it?
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So without further ado, I thank Marcia for being here today to discuss the deeper, more equitable engagement with community and research. And at the end of this, the challenge is going to be, and one thing I want to challenge everybody with is, how do we incorporate what Marcia is going to be talking today into our own research, and how do we become more engaged with community and the research? And without further ado, I don't want to take up much more time. Marcia, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, and I'm officially embarrassed. But I want to thank Dr. Mark Burke, for inviting me to be a part of this collaborative series. And thank you all for centering community in this talk today. Howard is a highly valued partner in the DC CFAR, and we work closely and collaborate often on many aspects of the CFAR's work. And that relationship includes extensive involvement of our Community Partnership Council with the Developmental Core, where Dr. Burke is part of the leadership. And I and other members of the CPC, or Community Partnership Council, are also very fortunate to be able to interact regularly with Dr. Anthony Wuto, who is part of the executive committee of the CFAR. And since the beginning of the CFAR, we've had the pleasure of having Dr. Goulder Downer from the AETC as a consistent and active part of our CPC. So, you know, we were already very closely collaborating, and I want to mention also that we work very closely and support Dr. Sahel Rana and his important work with the Stigma Conference each year. So I'm a grateful member of the DC CFAR staff, and as a community coordinator, just really want to thank them also and recognize them for the pleasure of working alongside such very amazing spirits there at the CFAR and within the admin core and throughout the CFAR, to all the cores. because, you know, together we have worked very long, over 12 years now, and worked hard together, doing the hard work to try to make our partnership meaningful. So it's been a real blessing for me to have landed at the CFAR and at GW, and to be able to work with Howard, all of our other partners of the CFAR. So it's been a personal pleasure for me. I also, as an aside, have a long personal roots with Howard, first having been born at what used to be Freedman's Hospital, which is now, of course, is Howard's Hospital. And it was at a time when my mother, who worked for 35 years at a hospital in Arlington, Virginia, could not give birth there. And the other irony is that we live right across the street from that hospital where she worked. So she had to come into DC to give birth to 5 of her 8 children, including me. And later on, I would both attend Howard for a while and worked at Howard as a very young woman in their math department there. And so, you know, I have a long personal roots with Howard. So, and this topic of community engagement and research is one that's really very close to my heart and my life. This presentation is a result of nearly 20 years of being involved as an advocate for community and community's role in research. And these thoughts and reflections also result from what I've learned from the community of people who live with or are affected by HIV, and who blaze the trails to provide care and comfort from the very early days of the HIV epidemic. Lastly, and very importantly, I bring my own lived experience of 35+ years, half of my own life where HIV is in it. I am grateful, therefore, and honored to be here. Next slide, please, Mark. So I like to start with a broader gratitude statement rather than keep it at the end where, you know, time may run out and I may not get to say it, but also because it centers me to always, you know, express my gratitude to those ancestors and trailblazers upon whose shoulders we do stand and from, you know, shoulders we work from. And also my gratitude for the CBOs, community-based organizations that were and are crucial to our wellness. And I also want to say how grateful I am to the community of advocates and activists who I learn so much from every day. I mean, even any day, even these days, I sit around the table with my fellow activists or advocates and just learn so much from them. So I am really grateful for that. I'm grateful to the committed, compassionate, and conscious researchers, policymakers, and care providers. I'm grateful to those unseen, unheard, and most vulnerable, and want to let them know that we see you. And I'm grateful to long-term survivors, to our families and friends, to the next generations, and let you know that we respect you, we respect your needs, we respect your leadership, and your ongoing involvement in this work and in this movement. Thank you, Mark. Next slide. So since it's Black History Month, I have a poem that sits right before me at my desk that I look at every day, several times a day, kind of like as an affirmation. And this is a poem called Still Here by Langston Hughes. You might have heard it. And the poem goes as this: I've been scarred and battered, my hopes the wind done shattered. Snow has frizzed me, sun has baked me. Looks like between them, they're gonna try to make me stop laughing, stop loving, stop living, but I don't care. I'm still here. And I'm happy to say that after 35 years of living with HIV and, you know, and battling some of the other comorbidities and illnesses along the way. So this is really my statement each day that I look in that affirms, you know, we're still here. Next slide. So, I mean, why did I entitle this Deeper Involvement? I mean, at first I had the topic involvement, started with involvement, but the more I've been thinking over the years and a lot recently is that, you know, why do we need deeper involvement? I don't want us to really rest on our laurels in terms of where we are. We've come a long way and a lot has taken place that benefits us all. But even with such a very long history of demanding and ensure community involvement in HIV research, there's still a lot of work to be done. People living with HIV, long-term survivors, women, LGBTQ people with trans experience, Latinx, the faith community, Black heterosexual men, younger people, and others in our community have more important questions to be answered through research. They have answers. They have a need for answers that will improve the quality of their lives and end the epidemic. They are also closest to the solution. So Paul Kawata, who heads the NMAC, came out with his statement this week. And, you know, one of his lines really captured me, because this is what it's about, that it's time to build real solutions that aren't window dressing and come from the communities we need to reach. This, to me, is our ongoing challenge. You know, I don't think it will end. It's just something that we always have to keep in mind, that we have to keep working at. Next slide, please. And this is another quote on community engagement and research that I took from recommendations from HANC, which is the HIV AIDS Network Coordination Committee and / community partners. They're part of NIH. And this is what they say, and this is what I believe, that collaboration with and participation of community representatives and other stakeholders in the research process helps to build trust, contributes to the acceptability and use of the intervention, and increases the likelihood that affected communities are invested in and supportive of the research being done. Next slide, please. So I think it's always important to not forget the past and how we were kind of brought here today, and to also recognize the struggles and the activism that took place years ago from the beginning of the epidemic. So just as a reminder for many, that it was back in December of 1987, in the early days of the epidemic, when NIH researchers began meeting every 3 months in DC with just the researchers. And then in November of 1989, what's known as ACT UP, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, ACT UP New York, attended the 7th AIDS Clinical Trials Group meeting uninvited. Those were the days when, you know, we just went in, took over rooms and spaces because we knew we needed to be there. From there, a patient constituency group was organized, and in 1990, it was recommended that community advisory boards be formed at each ACTG site. So, you know, the activists at that time, you know, really, their lives really depended on it to make sure that their voices were heard, that they were there at the table, that they used their influence and did actually influence the FDA to release drugs earlier, sooner, because it was a life and death situation. And, you know, many of us have seen many of the films and depictions of that period where, you know, people just took what they know they needed, which was, you know, an opportunity to have a voice in their own lives. And so as a consequence of a lot of that action, it's not required, but almost all, I think, NIH-sponsored research sites require, not require, you will find as pretty much a norm, community advisory boards. Next slide. So, you know, I focus a bit all the time and think a lot about principles that people have come up with, because, you know, principles to me are not something to be stated and kind of set aside. I mean, people took a lot of their time, a lot of their passion, a lot of their resources, their own physical bodies and strength to come together to lay down what were the things that were important to them as people. What were their rights? What do they demand their rights to be, even from the very early days of the epidemic? So there are some that are noted in the history. You will often hear about the Denver Principles of 1983, which is a manifesto that was developed by a group of gay men activists from around the US that outlines a series of rights and responsibilities for healthcare professionals and people with HIV or AIDS. You know, they include, you know, being treated as humans, whole humans, being there in the inside of things and not on the outside. But you know, you go back and look at those principles, and you know, as I said, I kind of use them as my conscious a lot of times to really think back and ask yourself: are you doing these things? Are you adhering to these principles that the actual people most affected laid down? You'll also hear later about GIPA-MIPA, which is greater and meaningful involvement of people with AIDS, a principle that aims to realize the rights and responsibilities of people living with HIV, including their self-determination and participation in decision-making processes that affect their lives. And the GIPA-MIPA was endorsed in 2001 by 189 member countries of the United Nations. Next slide, please. And one of my personal favorites these days, as I've come to, in recent years, come to know about the work of Brian Stevenson. You may know of from the film Just Mercy, but he's a lawyer and a social justice activist who has the lynching museum, pulled together lynching museum in Montgomery, Alabama, and does a lot of work representing the rights and being the voice for those who are incarcerated and on death row. And so he has laid out, I first heard him speak at an NMAC USCA conference, actually, US Conference on AIDS, and he laid out his principles for social justice work. And his principles are four. And he says that we should be proximate, get as close to the situation or the movement or the challenge so that we can get to know it better, to be proximate, to prepare to be uncomfortable. I mean, all of us have been in those situations that we may run away from, but we really should go to situations that make us maybe uncomfortable because we aren't familiar with those settings. We may feel out of place, but it's it's something that we have to be in order to get closer to it. I mean, to change the narrative, that we've all grown up with a certain narrative about people, maybe about poor people, people from different ethnic groups, people who speak different languages, people who love different people. And, it's our responsibility to change some of those narratives that are obviously very negative. And lastly, his principles don't give up hope, and he calls hope the enemy of justice. Even in the worst situations, I mean, and that's why, the Still Here poem so resonates, because we should never give up hope. But at the same time, we do understand why people do. Thank you. Next slide, please. So just to add a few more that I have gathered from listening to people over the years, and just to be reminded as other principles, when you think about forming a partnership or any kind of collaboration, to remember that research begins with people, even if you're in a lab. Whatever you're doing is aimed to hopefully help to improve the lives of people. So, keep people in your minds, people who live. I'm getting it. Are you getting it? I think we can go. People who live intersectional, and they're not just their disease. The principle of having mutual respect and respect for people who live with HIV and their lived experiences. Building relationships and trust. We hear a lot these days in this COVID era about trust or mistrust, but it's our responsibility to build that trust as we go along. Have language that's accessible to people and language that's destigmatizing. Language does matter. It's something to keep in mind in research, because often, we find in some research applications or plans, language that, when brought to the community or used to the community, it's very destigmatized. It's very stigmatizing. So, we need to pay close attention to that. Community leadership and power sharing. We'll talk a little bit more about equity in the partnership. That equity includes the opportunities for community members to be leaders and to share the power. And that means, as we'll talk a little later on, about sharing resources, influence, and things like that. And then support and facilitate and invest in community capacity building. I think this is really so important in research, because oftentimes when you want to partner with community members, they clearly have needs themselves in order to do the work that they're doing, and they're fighting even still every day in their lives still on behalf of people in the community to make sure that they get some of the services and some of their needs answered. So when we come to them to ask if they would partner on something, I think it's our responsibility to see how we might help them. And I think there are different ways to do that, and we have different examples by some researchers already that show how we can do that. But it's something that's very important to ask and to do. Intentional inclusion, the question of who is not in the space, who is not at the table. I often, really cite the experiences with USCA again, a national advocacy community that really goes out of their way to make sure that, that the community is displayed, the community displayed is the community that we know. It's very diverse. It's very rich. I mean, and you know, it's really inclusive. And that's what we aim for. But you know, and then they're very honest when members of a certain community will come forward and say that I don't see myself here. You know, where am I? And they, you know, and they're very responsive. And I've seen, you know, I've been really impressed with the way that they, as an organization, have made sure that you know, there's inclusion from different parts of the community. You know, what does it mean to partner, to collaborate, and to be in alignment with the community as you form these partnerships? One of the very important principles is the principle of dissemination of research findings. I think that's one of the consistent concerns raised by the community, that we don't know what's going on. You know, that information is not out there about research going on, how it's being done, how it benefits me, the community at large. So, you know, lots of us, including I'm sure many of you in this meeting, you know, have found different ways to make sure that information is, research and other information is disseminated, even if it's the process of research, what's happening along the process of research. Even if you don't have findings that you can release at any given moment, you can certainly still talk to people about what the research is, what it's doing, you know, what are some of the challenges, and you know, maybe seek their input on you know, addressing some of the challenges that might be happening in the research. And if they're part of the partnership with you, then they will be helping to do that anyway. And the last one, in terms of some of the principles, is to hire people of color in communities that's hardest hit by HIV. You know, I you know, have worked with other activists over the years who have, you know, say that now that we're healthier, we have more opportunity to do other things, even though, you know, we're still attending to our health. You know, what about an opportunity to actually get a job working in some of these offices and spaces, you know, get paid to do it? And I think those are very valid questions. And I know that a lot of the advocacy organizations, national and local, are really paying more attention to that, as become such a glaring concern that people, you know, are not able to make a livelihood. But, you know, it has been decades, you know, volunteering their time, and not to say that they won't continue to volunteer their time, but, you know, there should be ways and opportunities for them to be compensated also. Next slide, please. So, see, these are some of the roles of community that have been talked about and written about by some of our fellow community members, and it's kind of like summarizes some of what they have laid out as what community can do. You know, I'm not trying to, in some ways, it may seem like that this is you know, trying to sell community. I don't have to sell community, but just to remind you of what gifts that we have, and what, you know, if we work together, you know, what we can accomplish, because, you know, the community brings so much to the table. And I always say that research really can't take place without community, despite the fact that some may go on and finish. But, you know, at some point, community, you know, they have to come face to face with community on some of that research. So these are just some of the things that community can do. They can articulate problems and theories about the nature of these problems, and they're closest to some of the best solutions. Community, through their experiences and observations, expose power imbalance and underlying health disparities and partnerships that are formed to respond. Communities can bring hope, or they're committed to opportunities, and can be partners in raising and addressing challenges. Community can be points of reference in leading, framing, and elucidating discussions. And just always a reminder that people who live with HIV are a critical voice that bring valuable lived experiences and must be the end beneficiaries of HIV research. Next slide, please. So, centering community and addressing equity in the power dynamic. Affected communities should be equal partners throughout the research and engagement process, in policy and in practice. We need to change the power dynamic so that community members can contribute their thoughts, craft the knowledge transfer process, and build capacity to collect and share data. Participatory practice and strong community voices that may be outside of public health complement and enhance the discussions, the research, and the practice. So here, you know, there might be and there always are other movements going on in other sectors, maybe outside of the health sector, but that are voices and opportunities to bring that into even the process of HIV research. I mean, it could be a writer, it could be a poet, it could be, you know, an artist, a material artist. So, I mean, but there could be so many other ways to bring in that aspect of all of our lives. I tell you, a really short story. I heard a presentation very recently where the person presenting, a very respected researcher, started off her presentation, you know, bringing in the names of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Audre Lorde, and you know, that just caught my attention right away. It's a way of bringing you in, bringing communities in when they can hear voices from their lives, that in lives outside sometimes of their health, you know, who help to you know, grab onto, you know, who you are, who you were, where you came from, you know, what you've done in life, and give it some some song or some rhythm, you know, that also, you know, speaks to who we are in terms of our culture and traditions. So that's one that I saw how the impact on me recently, and I really liked that one. Next slide. So, you know, you see that I'm keep talking about the power dynamic because that's one of the biggest challenges I think that we still face. But it's important, you know, to ensure that people are not devalued or diminished, that they have access to information, they have access to resources. We talked about compensation, and are recognized. And then, you know, I talked about sharing, changing the narrative and the paradigm of from the past. I mean, there are these narratives that have kind of followed over the years, over the decades, with regard to HIV and community, and they've, you know, and that hasn't changed very much in terms of seeing community as, you know, this entity on the side, you know, who we can just tap on, you know, as we may need it, you know, who may not have the opportunities to be leaders. I mean, some of that is changing thanks to a lot of awareness and activism by both community and researchers. But it's something, you know, there's structures that are built up around those narratives. There are financial structures, there are award incentive structures, there are, you know, resource structures and that are barriers. And so those are the kinds of, that kind of looking to change that power dynamic and to shift that is really critical as we really dig deeper. And I think researchers need to acknowledge their position and think very carefully about how that position of power might impact their research and their attempts to form partnerships, you know. So, you know, and I think, you know, again, some I've seen are doing that, but we need to do more of it. And then the researchers are encouraged to think about opportunities for empowerment and resilience present among networks and communities of people living with HIV, and try to comprehensively capture the complexities of those different communities. You know, like any community, we're a very complex community, and, you know, but a lot has been done to try to bring to fore, you know, some of that complexity and that intersectionality, and to, I think, and, you know, researchers can utilize those opportunities to know those things and to incorporate them into their thinking about research and as they partner with community. I think we're going a long way. Next slide, please. So yeah, I put in the use of arts and culture, and I demonstrated in the beginning by using the poem by Langston Hughes. But you know, those kinds of contributions using the arts and culture really do bring people in, and I think you know, and it helps to acknowledge to everybody the strengths, the gifts, and assets that we have, and to provide a more natural platform for the development, analysis, and acceptance of ideas. So I think we shouldn't shy away from incorporating, you know, arts and culture into even our research. And it's important to combine quantitative methods with narratives and storytelling to comprehensively capture the lived experience of community members. Next slide, please. So what do research advocacy boards do? I mean, they may be called community advisory boards, they may be, like us, community partnership councils, or different ways to capture the different boards that are in place that, like I said, came about in the early days of HIV, and they've just, you know, become different things in different spaces as people define them. But they're there for a good reason. It doesn't limit the involvement. It doesn't, it's not the only way to involve with community for sure, and should not be the only way. There are many other, efforts going on. There are many other spaces in the community where some of these things are taking place, but the CAS provide, a good way to interact, with community, because most of them, if not all of them, are made up of community members, and made up many times of community members who, provide the kind of support to larger community, larger people in the community, whether we're talking about in DC, whether it's us helping us, or the Women's Collective, or, La Clinica, or, one of the trans organizations. I mean, people have a reach beyond themselves who are sitting at the board, and I think they do see it as part of their responsibility to bring what we know from, providing support and services to those communities to these advisory boards, who then can use those voices, in interacting with researchers. But they also can help to facilitate those researchers to get out in the community, and to also hear firsthand, interact firsthand with those same entities. So what we try to do, the Community Partnership Council of the CFAR try to do, is certainly engage the community in the initiation and collaboration of new and emerging research, ensure community representation and input in the selection of DC CFAR pilot and other research awards. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Ensure that the community is informed about HIV research in DC, and that research is disseminated. Provide input to and carry out priorities as established by NIH, the DC CFAR, and the community. We do a lot of that. We do a lot of interacting with NIH, help to facilitate their, building relationships for them in the community, so that they can better know the community that they're supporting, and that there's an opportunity for more intimate exchange with them. We're fortunate to be here in DC. They're able to do that often. And foster partnerships and collaboration to promote the success of community research. And this sometimes is research that's actually initiated by community members. I research ideas. We now have a mechanism within the CFAR where communities can partner with researchers in a very equal partnership, and they can put forward their own ideas that are then helped along through the process that we have in place at the CFAR. So we just recently launched an academic community research partnership. I see my colleague Brandy Robinson is on, and she's the one coordinating that, and we work very closely together to make sure that effort at a partnership is successful. Next slide, please. And these are just other examples. The one I want to pick out, maybe a couple of want to pick out. One is, we do try with the Community Partnership Council each year to have a community-wide update on research. It's usually held in the community, and we get report backs from, some of the international meetings like CROI, the Conference on Retroviruses and Opportunistic Infections, and other meetings or other where other issues come up. Like recently we had one on COVID and HIV, and had people from the community and researchers and providers to talk about that. But we try to create a forum for those kinds of discussions, and to make sure that the research is made available is accessible to the larger community. And I know some on the phone have participated in those, and we do those in partnership with some of the community organizations that we work with regularly. I think we had the last one at Whitman Walker Health, but we've had them at Howard before, at the AETC. We've had them at other spaces within the community. And the one thing that I really want to highlight, because I think it's something that certainly has been so very important, that we have the opportunity to engage regularly with leadership of the CFAR, including the executive committee, the scientific advisory committee, with investigators. Whenever there's a meeting, whether it's for the executive committee to convene, do their strategic planning, or whatnot, we have community members present, participating in those deliberations, and they're very valued voices at that table, I can tell you. The review of the pilot awards, I'll speak to in a minute, because that's part of the CFAR, and I think one of the one of the main focuses of the CFAR is to help to nurture, identify the next generations of researchers. And so this pilot award program allows for some of that to take place. And we as a Community Partnership Council is very much involved in that process of awarding the pilot awards, of reviewing their applications, of being on consultation calls with them as they prepare, applicants prepare their awards, and then, you know, and be part of the selection process. So that's something that you don't see all the time, but something that happens here, and we're very proud of that. And then also just want to highlight that we have scientific working groups and we have scientific interest groups. And for each of them, there's a community member who's a co-lead of that group, who helps shape, you know, the planning for the meetings of those interest groups. You know, very important voices for making sure that the community can collaborate, can be a partner in some of the research of a common interest. We have one on drug user health, for example. This is a very lively and rich interest group. We have a women's interest group, and they usually come about through sometimes the initiation from the community of an idea that, you know, we should have this. We have two scientific working groups, one on cure that's also co-led by community members, and one on ending the HIV epidemic that I'm also a part of. So any of those opportunities to share leadership, to share the visibility, to share the thinking and the planning. I think those are the kinds of things that also help to make sure that community is, you know, the involvement in the partnership is very meaningful and effective. So, and also, lastly, I think community boards also an important resource for researchers and community. So, you know, I described the people who are normally part of these boards and the kinds of history, experiences, information that they bring, and, you know, that's available. And so we help to facilitate sometimes the matching of those resources with, you know, some of the needs that researchers might have and that other community members might have. So, you know, we'd like to be seen as also an important resource. Next slide, please. I talked already about the pilot awards. Mark, can you go back to that one real quick, please? Yeah, so I think, and I covered all these things, but the one thing that I want to highlight here, the need to, again, to translate research language into lay language. That's easier said than done, we are learning. And, but it's required also as part of the application process for some of the reward applicants. But, you know, until we can find a way to, and a time to have a conversation that breaks down the research, even basic science research, in ways that we can understand, that community members can understand, I think we will have gone a long way, because that, you know, really without having a common language, it's like going to a foreign country and not being able to speak the language, you really are left out of almost everything. So everything that's really meaningful. So this is the same thing about research language. And so that's something that, you know, that I wanted to highlight there. So yeah, I think I've dealt with all the rest. Thank you, Mark. Next slide. And I talked about talks a lot about research dissemination. It seems like it's an easy thing, but it's not done as much as it should be done, or as well as it could be done. And we have so many ways that we can disseminate now, including the use of social media, which is being used so much more. You know, I'm looking at so many more Facebook Live and YouTube and other ways to participate in research dissemination. Have been part of one effort that we had to have a Facebook Live conversation about women research needs. But, you know, that's certainly the use, and probably more use of social media would be very good, because it does open it up to a whole lot more people. And you're not depending on the circulation of a journal article, which are very important, but it's not the only thing or the only way to get information out. And the idea is to get information out to as many people as we can, so that people can be well informed and feel like that they're, you know, part of the process. Next slide, please. So, you know, often we're approached and said, you know, what do I need to do to partner with someone from the community? And we get that question often. So I just thought I'd lay out some specific steps. Yeah, and I always say to people, because it's really about, beginning to build a relationship first. So, familiarize yourself with potential community partners, visit their websites, follow them on social media, participate in their events and activities that are open, and volunteer if appropriate. Just get this is the whole be proximate thing again that Brian Stevenson talked about, find ways to get to know and to be better and more familiar with what's going on in the community. I mean, oftentimes, people come in, they've not had any relationship in the community, they don't know the community. So, if your interest is service to that community, begin, familiarizing yourself early on in the community, and then intentionally build relationships over time with those potential partners or other people you may meet. You may be at an event they're having as a volunteer, and you get to meet and just talk to on the ground with people and hear, what some of their concerns, what are some of their feelings of self-worth, and their feelings about how they've been able to deal with very challenging situations. I mean, all of those will be very helpful as you begin to seek a partnership. And I mentioned before, to see what their needs and priorities are, and consider ways that you might help to address them. Okay, maybe you don't have a budget that will address their needs materially, but there are other ways. Maybe other resources can help to link them to other resources that would help them to do the very critical things that they're doing in the community. And then, come up with an agreement and document your partnership, an agreement on how you're going to work together, and, what protocols will you observe in your partnership and things like that, once you get to, a more serious point in your partnership. And then honor the agreement, recognize their contributions and provide findings throughout the process, and talk through those findings together, so that you can, make for a better outcome. Next slide, please. So, I think COVID is teaching us, or certainly reminding us of a lot. And so I just kind of beginning to think myself about some of the things that we are being reminded of. Some of them may go back to some of those principles that I started with, but, some things that just haven't gone away, and they won't go away, and we just need to just deal with it. The historical mistrust in healthcare and research. It just didn't start with the Tuskegee study, and that's, it's been there all along, even before Tuskegee, and it's coming up in so many other ways even today. So we need to just be very clear that this, that there is this mistrust, and that it's valid in a lot of places and spaces, and keep trying to find ways to address that, mostly by you behaving in ways that we've talked about before that kind of help to minimize some of that distrust, including being transparent, and be willing to talk about racial injustice and health disparities, because these are the things that people in the community will talk about, and these are the very things that are causing our community to be more vulnerable for things like COVID. So we need to reckon with that. And the COVID is also showing the role of trusted community voices. So it's very important that we have people who interacting with community who look like the community, wherever you're from. I mean, who would have thought that the woman, Dr. Kismakia Corbett, would find there would be reason for her to come out from behind the lab in her coat and speak to community about what she's doing. And Mark and I are already talking about doing the same, as we try to bring the basic science and other science to community, is to show that there are people who look like the community in these labs and doing this work, but we never knew. We thought there are these few little white men in a corner doing all the work. Maybe historically that's been the case, but I think where that's not the case, we should make sure that help to make sure that there are more of those faces in all throughout the process. And let the community see those because the trust level may rise. It doesn't mean that they would trust them just because they look like them, but it certainly helps to know that there are people who look like you in this process, whether they're researchers, providers, policymakers. So that's still a remaining issue, and so it helps us to know who's doing the research and how they're doing it when we have these conversations throughout the process. that we also, COVID is teaching us that we need, there's a need for ongoing engagement in information, not something that's done because a pandemic, a serious pandemic has hit. It should be going on anyway, and then continue in order to make sure that there's growing research and health literacy. I mean, here you have people who are sometimes on the line with their loved one in the hospital, and you have to tell them, that there's this trial going on, and they may not know anything about clinical trials or what it means and what am I signing on to in informed consent. So we can have those conversations outside of a pandemic, so that communities can be much more ready to make such life-saving decisions. And then I think the thing that stands out from COVID that we should always think about with everything is that there are things that really cut at people's spirits and souls, and this whole thing of having to grapple with grief and loss, in ways that are so counterintuitive and just counter cultural practices and traditions. We have to find a way, find ways to honor those things, honor the need to grieve, honor the need to deal with loss and sadness and serious illnesses. And and one of the ways is to understand people's, what's important to people, what's important to their hearts and spirits and souls, their cultural practice and traditions, and find creative ways to get around, not get around it, but to incorporate it in different ways. And so, I think these are things that we should carry on, even well after COVID. Next slide, please. So, as I conclude, I think the challenges ahead in deepening the community research partnership are some of the things that we talked about before. Really figuring out how to build equity in the partnership, how to build trust-ready language, building capacity. I mean, all these are, they also speak to resources that may be needed, but we have to, find ways to get those resources. And then, when you think about the needs of the researcher, what are their structural barriers? What are their budgetary barriers? What are their tenure and promotion concerns? I mean, what drives them and what gets in the way of maybe even their desire, to partner? So, I think we need to really, look honestly at those things and come to terms with different ways to address it, because they can be real barriers. And then lastly, the need to align, where we come out in our partnerships, there may be kind of mismatched priorities or views of what needs are, and we have to, in our relationship, try to find a way to align those. Is that the last one, or is that one more? Maybe? No, that's the end. Okay, so I want to thank you all very much, and look forward to any questions you might have, or any other things that you might want to bring up that add to this conversation. Thank you so much.
Since I'm kind of the moderator, I want to take moderator's initiative here. I want to ask you some questions here, if that's okay. Building that trust is, and building those relationships, when you're dealing with getting surveys or direct health information from the community, that is really important. But what about us basic scientists? How do we build relationships? And the one thing I keep on hearing coming from here, and I love this last one, the last bullet point you have here, because that's kind of what I've been thinking about, is aligning mismatched priorities and needs. How can we as basic scientists, some of us who are basic scientists, align what we're doing with what the community needs? And how do we, there's kind of this gap between some basic scientists, and we've talked about this in the past, basic scientists and community members. One of the ways that we are doing to kind of bridging that is making sure that, like you said, with the pilot awards, making sure that the community member gives their input, say, will this directly impact the community? How will this impact? And what's that score of it? But I think we could probably even start before that to have communication between the scientists, between academia and communities, and allow and kind of break down the barrier of communication.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of what we need to do, is to have those conversations early on. Just last week, I had a conversation with a younger researcher who really wants to do the right thing. She has a research activity that she's working on, but I said, why don't we do this? Instead of approaching community about your research, why don't you just hear out different members of the community about, hear from them. They might represent other things besides what you're doing, but that they are people in the community who could add to your understanding and create an opportunity for you to have a dialogue before you move into asking them to be a part even of the design of your project, which then she has a project that would lend itself well to partnering on the design of it. I mean, maybe too late now. She's further along down the process, but she's trying to find different ways to even kind of retroactively putting some of those things that have come out of some of the principles. But I think with basic science, it's also a matter of really making the effort. I would love to see a contest to have researchers to break down their basic science idea, and and see who's most effective in terms of getting the message across about what they are doing. It's like, what are you doing? And so I think having opportunities and really challenging, put out different ways to challenge basic scientists to break down the language and then have a conversation around it and see how that language then translates into the scientific language that's needed in order to move it forward. And then keep coming back, about what you're doing and how whatever input that the community members may have made or the questions they may have raised, how you might have answered in the different ways that you're working in your lab. So, I think it's a matter of just, like you said, starting the conversations earlier and including them along the way of your process. Certainly, when you finally are able to disseminate anything, they should be part of that dissemination too, because they have been part of the conversations from early on.
And do you have a list of community, I know you have your finger on the pulse of the community. Do you have a list of the community partners and contacts? So a researcher, like you just mentioned, that that young researcher that wanted to do a survey or something like that with the community, asking certain questions. Well, if they would have had a list for which they could tap into ahead of time, and ask those questions before writing up the proposal, is there such a database?
I think we need to come up with another one. I mean, the Department of Health actually has, I don't know how updated it is, but I've gone to it myself because they have organizations that they have funded. And it's on their website. I haven't visited in a long time, so I can't even say for sure that it's still there, but I found it immensely helpful just to see the range. I mean, because yes, we can come up with maybe even an inter-cab list from our cabs from all over, to get other names to add to ours. But I think it's something, that came up in the conversation last week also, it's something that we should and can do and maybe put on our website or link it to the Department of Health. Others have one. So that's something we need to follow up on and make it more available.
And with the contact and let them know that that members of our CFAR might be reaching out to them. And that's part of the way that we break down the barriers and build those relationships.
Yeah, and also let them know that these are what the general theme of your interest in research, and see is there any alignment from their point of view with what that is, and begin to have those conversations. So they'll because different community entities are also needing to navigate their own capacity to respond and to be available. I think one of the things that's kind of probably frustrating to a lot of researchers is that that they can't get ready access or quick responses, because I mean their total focus has been on providing support, and it's been very challenging. So so it's not always as easy as contacting an organization for sure, but again by helping to facilitate those relationships, maybe we can also be helpful as a body to facilitate those. And some researchers also already have their good relationships with community members. I've seen that, and they're able to, because of that relationship. I keep using the word relationship because it is about relationship building. before anything else. It really is about relationship building and maybe making sure that you nurture that relationship in the process so that you can, it'd be a smooth transition from, knowing someone to then asking them to participate in any kind of way. So, but yeah, I think those are some of the ways.
Any questions from the audience? Please speak up.
Hello, Ms. Ellis. This is Marjorie Gondre-Lewis from Howard University.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for a wonderful talk and a respite, to just step back a little bit and think about the community. I just have to say that that's always been one of the more challenging aspects for me when I'm trying to do clinical translational research and trying to engage the community and respond to needs for what I want to do. And you hit the nail on the head in terms of the amount of time that it takes. When I'm looking at your list here of building equity and building trust, and I have a 1 or 2 year grant, and by the time I build all that equity and trust, which may or may not work, right? Because it's human interaction and whether that particular group is appropriate for your research. By the time you do all of that, you need to show that you have made progress on your grant, on your proposal, that you're moving forward. And so I just wonder whether you could give some examples, because I know you work with researchers, and I'm one of the basic science researchers that Mark was talking about who faces some of these challenges. I just wonder if you might give a concrete example of, people you've worked with who do have fruitful relationships with communities, and how much did it take from them? Did it require a team? Does it need to be always the PI? And what does the principal investigator, the basic researcher, have to do to make sure that they're successful in their academic appointment, as well as reaching out to share that research and those findings with the community and include them as part of the work?
Yeah, no, good to meet you, Marjorie. Those are exactly the questions, because what has to be done is that, part of it is, yes, you do have the issue of what you need to do in order to stay on your timeline and within your budget. I think that that if there are any ways to incorporate in your timeline, in your budget, the time that it does take to build that relationship, and to partner, and that people who review it or will see the value in that. So one of the concrete examples that we use a lot is one team that was built. A partnership that was built between a researcher, Dr. Shanika Hull, some of you may know, and the Women's Collective. And, they were able to form a partnership that worked, because the trust was built. She looks like them. I think that was very helpful. It was clear that she was willing to take the time and make sure that their concerns were met, that their research interests and priorities were met. That they work together very closely, that they, even when they would present the research, they would present together. And that really hit the community very, very hard in a very good way, to see that you can be visible and present with the researcher. And, you don't have to have this notion that the researcher, is the one who's seen at the end of everything. So, but it was, I'm sure it was a relationship that, also had to address some of the questions that you're asking, and I don't know to what extent, she might have gotten a ding or warning about, the amount of time that she was spending in that relationship, and what it might be taken away from. But she was very committed to that and their relationship, and they, to this day, I think have a very good relationship, and it's a model that we have talked about, quite a bit, because it did seem to have worked there. But there were things that they had to establish. I mean, the organization itself may have its own protocols on how they work with researchers. And that's, you might want to ask that, in the beginning, and just become aware with what they're aware of what they also require in order to interact. I've seen cases where CBOs, when presented with a research idea, feel that it just takes more time than it's worth for them, given their prioritizing of what they need to do, and what, and their capacity to do it within their own budgets. If researchers don't have a budget to say, help pay the salary of someone on their staff who might be involved in the work or whatnot. So, it's something that really does have to be worked out, but I really encourage you to stick with it. If there are ways that, that we can talk through, other things that might be done, let's do that, because, and I think more than ever, because of the economic and other challenges, and then the growing needs in the community that they're putting the pressure on a lot of the CBOs. I mean, really, it does come down to, what is that priority? What is the priority of that organization or that person?
Thank you for that. So would a researcher then of the DC CFAR be able to reach out to you, for example, and discuss the specific project, because not all communities are equal, right? We have to meet each other's needs, and there may or may not be interest in the research project proposed.
Yeah, I mean, and then not just me, although I see part of my role to help facilitate those conversations between other members of either our board or other members in the community that might be more aligned with what you're doing. So, oftentimes, we do, ask if other of our members would be the ones to talk with you about what you're doing, and to see if there's the kind of interest there, or I'm sure there are other people within the community that might be a good match. But yeah, you can certainly start with me, and I can certainly then introduce you maybe to others who'll be better for you to talk to.
Well, I think Marcia, that and Dr. Androulis, you probably gave a great idea to me. When we, as researchers, put in our profile for the CFAR, for example, we give 3 or 4 items of where our research interests are, right? Well, if we have our community association partners do the same thing, saying, I'm a community person may be interested in cognition and aging, or the aging community, senior citizens with HIV, or another person or another community member may be more interested in working with adolescents. That could be our leeway in saying, hey, I'm working with adolescents. I want to talk to this community partner here. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good idea. And actually, I have a question. Alan, are you still online? This is a question for both Alan and Marcia. I hope he is. Anyway,
I am indeed.
Okay, great. So I'm going to engage you now. So do you think that there's going to be a time when someone like me, who's a basic scientist, or Dr. Gondalus, who's a basic scientist, will submit an application? And I know we do this we have our community association person review applications, but be a consultant on a basic science application who may not have anything to do with the science, but really kind of giving that feedback, saying, yes, this is important to our community, and be listed as possibly a consultant with a letter of support, saying that this is important to our community for the following reasons, and put it into the terms that so it shows the engagement between the scientist and the community, saying, I have engaged, they've given me feedback, I've told them what I'm doing, and this will strengthen my application for NIH.
I think the way we've tried it, Marcia can comment as well, I think the way we've tried to do that for certainly the pilot awards is through the consultation calls, and ensuring that there's a community member on each of those, and looking for opportunities to link that investigator to community members who might have expertise in that area. And I think of several very prominent examples where, sometimes even basic scientists were surprised that community members were on the call, but the community members had extremely helpful input for how they should view their projects. Marcia, is that accurately stated?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that's that certainly happens with the consultation calls. But if there's going to be an ongoing need of where it require even more time, you can build in your budgets for community consultants. you know, if you feel that that would be appropriate also. So, but yeah, those are ways to do that.
Excellent. Are there any other questions or comments? I know we're a few minutes over time right now.
This is Alan again. I just want to thank Marcia for an absolutely wonderful and comprehensive overview and for everything you do to support HIV research in the district. Marcia, you're really an inspiration for so many of us.
Thank you, Dr. Greenberg.
So with that, I think I'm going to thank you now, Marcia, and I thank you for a wonderful presentation, and another plug for what we're going to be doing later on in the spring about the bench side to community talk, where we're going to put some of these into action, where we're having our basic science person work with a community member and present their research. And I'm so excited. I'm working with Marcia on that. And our next collaborative lunch is going to happen on March 31st. Kim Blankenship from American University will be presenting. So you'll be receiving those invitations in another few weeks here. But again, thank you everybody for coming today. And Marcia, again, I look forward to chatting with you and really picking your brain about different community aspects. And how we can bring.
I would like to also invite anyone on the call to, if they want to reach out to me, Mark can certainly provide my information. I'd be happy to talk with you.
Sylvia?
Oh, I think it was wonderful, and I have already gotten an idea from it. When Mark, you gave it to me. I mean, we must make a directory of interests of community members and have it be available to our membership. And we just need to get knowledge out there about what resources we have within the community. And thank you, Marcia. It was excellent.
Thank you so much, Dr. Silver.
And I think that's going to be really helping the community drive the research that we're doing. Give us ideas. You might be, I might be interested in the brain, but you may say, I'm worried about the long-term cardiovascular effects of these antiretroviral therapies. Are there anyone who is interested in that? How can we drive that type of a research program? And how can we as a CFAR promote that and reach out to individuals who may not be in HIV research to come into it because of their expertise in a certain organ system? Or, you know, I think those are things that we can really work with the community. And I thank everybody for being on this talk. And I'm going to stop sharing, and this will be, hopefully, if all the technology works out properly, we will get this up and running on the CFAR website in the near future for the recording to be available.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.